Welcome to Insight-Driven Decisions, how leaders turn insight into strategic impact. Our goal is helping you move from insight to impact to action, and doing all this through decision-grade insights.
In the previous episode 4, you watched how Blackstone Products went from a niche startup to merging with the company that founded a 75-year-old industry. And now they're leading them and they're leading the entire industry. So you saw through that how they use decision-grade intelligence to get to that point. Unfortunately, most of the folks that are listening today and that are watching this, you may have information and you may have dashboards and you may have even insights, but you don't have the fuel to come even close to driving the success of Blackstone Products as an impact from your insights. And John, we were talking last time about the insights leader who was very, very busy, but had no seat at the decision table. And it made me realize most leaders actually don't even know if the data they're paying for is decision grade or if it's just noise. And honestly, I think it's because a lot of the times they're afraid to ask. What's your take on that?
I think it could be that. I think it's, again, a two-way street. It depends on who you ask. If you're asking the person who's giving you the information, they're going to tell you, yeah, of course it's decision grade. In fact, I think I made the comment myself. I believe that everything that I've ever produced is decision grade.
True.
It's whether or not somebody chooses to act on it. The decision rarely rests with the person who's actually doing the analysis. That's why I think it's incumbent upon what you've mentioned several times. The person who needs the information needs to really refine and identify what it is, what is the decision that needs to be made, and therefore you can best create the questions that need to be asked, that need to be answered. I think a lot of times there are executives who, when push comes to shove, they're not really sure. And so they'd rather rely on their gut and then they blame the person anyway.
Yes. Yeah, we've been through that many a time, haven't we?
You didn't do what I said. Okay, you're out.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's kind of what it is. But I think any good executive, you know when you have decision grade intelligence, you know it, right? So you're right. Some of them are probably afraid to ask. Some of them probably know they don't have it. That's why they rely on their gut, even though they spend gobs of money building dashboards and getting these 4-color glossy printouts of all this stuff and spreadsheet after spreadsheet. And it's not pointing anybody in a useful direction. You can say, well, I've got all this information. I spent money on it, so therefore it's like the big data thing. We looked at the data, but again, it comes down to how is the data being analyzed and is it actually producing insights or is it just producing analysis? I keep going back to that comment you made way back in the beginning. Is it for curiosity or is it for consequence? And if it's for curiosity, what does it do for us? It's got to be for consequence. And the only way you can make it for consequence is to have a true, full collaboration with the person doing the work and the person that needs the work.
It sounds so simple, but when you're mentioning that, I'm reminded of a story from a longtime friend and colleague of mine who he happens to be in crisis management. So he's a consultant. He's called in to help struggling or failing companies when they're taking on water and are about to go under. And recently he got a contract with a well-known, long-established retailer in the outdoor lifestyle space. And he said, I did what I normally do. I go in, obviously, when you're a turnaround expert, you focus on the financials. So that's the first place they go. And then he said, the second is culture. I mean, is it even possible that we can flip this thing around? And then he said, the third, and he said, this has changed over the years. We never used to do this, but now we do because there's so much available. Every customer intelligence or customer insight, that thing they call customer insight, all of that data, all that intelligence. He said, I just go through that. And in this particular case, the retailer had a lot of that. He had a lot of just data analysis from the way that we would describe it. And they'd spent well over $1 million over 5 years. They had worked with the biggest, the most well-known research insight companies in order to get a lot of this data. And yet here was his point. He said, none of it pointed to the growing disconnect that was occurring between the brand's fading quality and customer confidence in the product. And what he found out was If someone did raise their hand and go, hey, there's a concern here, they were quickly put down. They were muted at the very least, if not completely ignored. Any research that did not enforce the misplaced, I guess you would call it, pride and confidence of the C-suite team would be completely buried. So he's looking at a table, piles and piles of what they were calling insights, and realizing that all of that information, is what we would call it, was just being used to keep egos afloat, keep valid concerns at bay. And the business questions, to your point, required to maintaining successful operations were never identified, much less asked and even addressed. And so this is the type of situation AIM is created to correct and even prevent. But here's a big thing about this, and you mentioned it the other day, and I thought it was awesome. Companies have to be ready to accept the rigors of honesty that AIM requires. So while this may sound like a extreme story, I think it represents more of what's happening in the majority of cases out there in companies today. What do you think about that?
Occurred to me, I was hired once by a large network group. And in the hiring process, right, I was told they wanted a truth teller. They wanted somebody to hold people accountable, and they wanted somebody to keep people honest. Those were literally the terms that were used. We want a truth teller, hold people accountable, keep people honest.
Yeah.
That's what they said.
How long did that last?
Actually, not very long. And one of the last things that I kicked off before I left was they had been doing, in my view, they had been taking some kind of not very strategic risks with the brand. And I asked for what kind of brand tracking had they done and could I see a history on it? They hadn't done anything in a while. And I said, I don't like to say this, but I think that there's some damage being done to the mothership. I really do. And before I left, we actually got a project underway, selected a vendor, put together the survey and everything. And it was launched right after I left. And I was close with the people on my team. And I found out afterwards that the results came back and it in fact said, yes, there is some real damage that has been done to the brand. Viewers don't look at the network the way they used to, and they're watching a lot less because of it. And they took it into the president and she said, bury this. Do not let the CEO of the networks see this. They literally. And so he never saw it because it would have reflected poorly on her.
Yep.
And I will have to say this, she didn't ask to have the work done. I just did it because I was trying to hold people accountable and keep people honest.
Yep.
But if you're not ready to do it, they could have at least mitigated some of the damage. They chose not to because the person in charge didn't want to. So yes, that's a key part of the whole thing. You got to be strong enough not only to ask the question, but to face the answer, however it comes back. That's a key.
What you're pointing to, just with that story, it came to mind the idea that there was a customer truth in everybody's mind, even though they appointed you the truth keeper. They just didn't want you to interfere with the customer truth that was in all of these individuals' minds. And what happened in this case, you got just short stopped by the person going, we're not even going to raise this any further. I would say that that would go even further, at least it does in our process, as you go, okay, so we act on this insight specifically. What does that action affect, if anything, really, when we move forward? And that's the one problem that is just obvious among all of the work that you and I have done. I think there is an assumption out there, and I think you said it the other day. You said, you know what? I hate the word insight because insight just kind of implies value. It's not data. Everybody knows data needs to be worked to give value. Information needs to be worked, reports, but insight, you say that word and people just assume that it's valuable. And I think that's very key for today's issue versus anything we've had in the past, because you and I have been doing this a long time. I think the assumption today is if it's called insight, any and all, it's reliable, should be trusted. And honestly, that's just not true. And the reason is because that bad insight, you and I have seen this as well, it drives decisions too. And that's what the story about my consultant colleague, he found misread, misinterpreted data driving decisions. Definitely internal politics driving decisions. They were using AI. So wrongly placed confidence in this AI generated thing driving decisions. And then you get to the basic survey stuff. And he's like, John, I mean, these things were asking questions you would never have asked. I mean, you just wouldn't have done it with the way that you approach this. And yet they're asking these questions and we're looking at them as there's nothing we can do with this. And yet the current leadership is trying to use them to do something as far as a decision to be made. And it just couldn't work. And so there's a question that's not being asked. And it's what evidence is actually strong enough to trust. And that's, again, adding to that whole first thing that you just brought up. I think those are the two twin-headed monsters that we're dealing with. What do you think about that?
I mean, first of all, yes, not every observation is an insight. To me, an insight means that there's value in it. It's something that you learn from the data. I've actually worked with some AI tools recently, trying to see how they interpret some large data sets that I've come across.
Yeah.
What I've been told and what I've learned is that you have to learn how to talk to it in order to make it give you back something that's useful.
Right.
So you need to put in the time that you would otherwise spend, that I would otherwise spend actually doing my analysis and hopefully generating insights, learning how to tell AI how to do it so that it can spit it back for me. But it's a twin-headed monster. But in order to elicit insights that are of real value, it's a two-way street. It has to be the person that's asking you have to help them refine what their ask is. What is the decision to be made? How is this decision going to affect other decisions? And what happens if the data comes back? It's not what you think it's going to say. What happens if you make no decision? What happens if you just sit pat? Like you said a while ago, it's like risk and reward. So sometimes I think the only way you learn whether or not you've got investment grade insights is when it tells you to do something that you really didn't want to do. Like you wanted the work to come back and you wanted it to reinforce your pre-held belief, right? And you got to go like, maybe I'm not right. Maybe I don't have my finger on the pulse. Sometimes that's the one way that you can learn whether or not something's investment grade or not. You have to be smart enough to recognize an echo chamber, kind of. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's what today was about. That's why the title on this is that 5-minute test. This is what we want to leave for everybody. So here's a simple test for you. Everybody is listening here. This is the way that you can find out whether you're getting the answers that are required to run your business with confidence. Because as John and I have been talking, I hope it's been becoming clear to you, in today's world, you need a fundamentally different class of insight. So what we call this is the AIM stress test. So if your current insights team or agency can't pass these 5 questions, you aren't just wasting money, you're actually making decisions kind of blindly with a blindfold on. So I want you to try something. If you're listening, I want you to think or physically reach into your digital files or physical files, pull up that most expensive data insight or research report that you did in the last year or two. Now, if you're a mid-sized firm and up, this thing has cost you 6 figures, 6 months. It could cost a little bit less than that, but you get the point. It's definitely that one. John, I'm sure you can remember any of those from your past as well. So the whole point being, we're going to give you 5 questions and view this as an intelligence forensic audit. And if the report that you're thinking of or holding or looking at digitally, if it can't answer these, it's not an asset for you. I hate to break it to you. It's just a very expensive experiment, academic exercise. If it's physical in a report, it's a paperweight. So here's the first question. The first question deals with something John and I have talked about forever. It's called the ownership anchor. Look at the report. Can you explicitly name a person who owns the decisions these insights are supposed to inform? Not a department, but a person, the human person. This is simple yes or no, all of these questions. So it's pass or fail. So can you name a specific person that this will be acted on or was meant to be acted on in terms of the report and the insights? If yes, it's a pass. If no, it's a fail. The second question deals with the specificity of what you're getting from this report. So it's called the specificity filter. Think of it this way. What very specific business question does the insight in this report actually answer for you? Does it tell you something like, hey, you need to increase your brand awareness? Or does it tell you, you know what, you should actually cut your ad spend over here? Potentially, let's move it to a premium product launch because that's going to get you further than just spending on more ads. Can you name that type of a specific decision or decisions from the report that you're holding, thinking about? If yes, pass. If no, fail. The third question is the uncertainty killer. So this is, what specific uncertainty did this report remove? Every leader, if you're looking at this report, you know the knot that was in your stomach. You know the thing that was keeping you up at night. There was some type of a decision. You just needed to know whether you should go do it or whether you shouldn't. Did this report actually help you sleep better? Did it untie that knot in your stomach? And so for this, can you name that specific uncertainty? If yes, pass it. If no, it's a failure. Question 4, because it kind of builds on the first 3. I love this. This is my favorite. This is the what then stress test. Think back to when the report you're holding or thinking about or envisioning was done. Ask yourself this. Now that time has passed, can you name any specific action or actions that went differently than expected because of this report? And then follow that up with, well, what else happened differently? Or was it just business as usual after the presentation? If you can name specific action or actions that went differently than expected based on this report, well, then that's a pass. If not, then that's a fail. Final question. This is the consequence calculator. So what were the consequences of making a wrong decision? Were they clear to you because of this report? Now, it's possible you're living with those consequences right now because your decision was not based on insights designed to provide the required answers to actually guide you. So the question for this one is, can you name from the report the consequences of getting the decisions made at the time wrong? If yes, that's a pass. If no, that's a fail. John, what do you think about those questions for these folks for a quick assessment of where they're at with their information?
Love it. Perfect. It's absolutely perfect.
Awesome. Okay. Here's the deal for everyone listening. Obviously, you have 5 questions. Passes, yeses, those were in one column, I hope. No's were in another. Here's a couple of other questions for you. When you look at your sheet and you've got your yeses and your nos and your passes and your fails, what would have been different for you if you could have had yeses to all 5 of those questions? Would you be in a different situation right now? Would your decisions have been different as far as the path you took? How different would that have looked for the company? And how different would it look for you personally? So if you're a CEO, a marketing leader, an agency leader, or a client lead, and you just realize your most expensive reports fail this audit, you don't need more data. You need better decision-grade architecture. And then here's my final question for you. Scale of 0 to 10. I love that scale. Dealt with it for years. So powerful. Scale of 0 to 10. 10 being very motivated. How motivated are you to get the business results you want? How motivated are you to make decisions that can dramatically affect you and your company's trajectory based on real, honest answers to your business questions? If what we just went through was an interesting exercise that you just kind of floated through, you probably gave scores of 5 or less to that specific question. Then what we're talking about really isn't for you. If you realize that filling the gap between what you are working with and what you should be working with will make real differences in their impact on the decisions you make moving forward, you probably gave yourself a rating of 7 or higher. You're who this whole thing is developed for and built for, and you're who we want to talk to and take care of. John, any comments on that?
I still love your line. What is it? A fundamentally better class of insight
Yes.
instead?
Yep.
That's what this is.
Yep.
And yeah, I love that.
So I guess when we're really looking at this, if you've watched any of the previous episodes, you've seen the three circles coming together. One of those circles is about clarity. That is what the AIM whole process is meant to do, is just bring clarity to your decision-making process. So whether you've got conflicting information or it's messy information, or you just took the test and all 5 failed, and you want something different, here's just to really drill it home. Here's some more important questions for you. And this should be pretty easy to answer given the test you just took. So what you're currently trusting, should you be trusting it? And if you are trusting that information, is it possible you're missing something else? And then when there is a business decision that really matters, because as my friend, the consultant, just figured out when I shared earlier, there's a lot of things can be found out, but they don't relate to a decision at all. So when a decision comes up for your business and it really, really matters, how are you validating that intelligence? And so that is what we created the AIM method for. We want to turn these 5 failures into 5 strategic wins. I've opened up a few spots this month for what I'm calling a 15-minute gap audit. We'll take the one decision that you are currently paralyzed by, run it through the AIM framework. No 124-page decks like John has talked about earlier, just the clarity you need to act. So email me at john@burscheckresearch.com with the subject heading audit in it. And together, let's turn your customer data into your greatest competitive advantage. Anything to end with, John?
Fundamentally better class of insight.
Love it. All right. Thank you for listening. And I will look forward to you joining us on our next episode.